Rebekah, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
Yeah. So your book, Rhythms of Renewal, which just released, an immediate hit. Like you made it to Fallon from what I saw on YouTube too, right? That was fun. And number 2 in the world. We better explain the Fallon reference. That was really funny.
That was funny. Well, I think I was on the Today Show the day before his book came out. And so it stayed down at like number 2 to 5, 6, but his book came out. So he was showing a big poster of his book. And then mine was right next to it. So I was like, oh, I got a little cameo.
On the Tonight Show. Hey, I'll tell you, that's more than most of us will ever get. So you gotta enjoy that.
Someone sent it to me. They're like, oh, I love that renewal book made an appearance on Jimmy Fallon. I was like, what are you talking about? So it was just funny.
That's great. But number 2 in the world, which is amazing in the Today Show and a lot of other media outlets. Now, you've written before, and one of the questions, we have a lot of aspiring writers and writers who are listening and that, but like, it's always a bit of a mystery as to why a book catches on and then why it doesn't. But this one was an immediate hit. Any thoughts on that or why, other than the grace of God, which is clearly operating?
Right. I think the topic is at hand. So part of the research behind the book is that 77% of us right now in society are facing physical symptoms of stress. So that's racing mind, shallow breathing, sleepless nights. And as a result, we are collectively spinning out. And so it's a topic that's a felt need. 4 out of 5 of us basically are feeling this personally. And as a result, we are told often in the church, like, your faith needs to grow. You need to pray about this. And Jesus is your peace, which I preach, to the rooftops, right? Like I believe that in every way. I also believe that God created in rhythm and he established boundaries and framework within rhythm. He created our bodies in rhythm, the universe and nature in rhythm. And when we stay within those boundaries, we do flourish and we walk in peace and purpose. But when we get outside of those things, because of a digital revolution or industrial revolution, and we think we never have to shut down or turn off out of efficiency, then our bodies pay the price, and our relationships pay the price, and our purpose and passions pay the price. And so people are paying the price right now, and they know that, and they're trying to figure out what are the steps to get back in rhythm. And so this book is just practical steps, a guidebook. It's almost like a field guide for fear. Like this is what you do. This is what you do when you are overwhelmed and overcome. These are God. This is God's invitation. This isn't Rebekah. This is me just siphoning out what I see, the framework he established for his people to walk in peace.
So I'm curious, and we're going to get into the content of the book because I think it is a huge issue for men and women, fear, anxiety, stress, the whole deal. But like, did it just come out of the gate strong? Did it what happened? Because we all as authors, we watch our books and, you have a launch window. Did you do anything different this time around on your launch?
Well, the funny thing is I wrote it in secret, obviously, over the last 15 months, and I had adopted a little girl from China. So I really benched myself professionally. I stopped traveling to speak for 9 months, and I was home doing edits, and I was very intent on this content having faith and science together. So research and data is in every chapter. I wanted it to be a smart book. And so I was almost embarrassed to start talking about it. Like you've had it so long. It's like so much a part of what you've lived and done. And these are rhythms I've started to walk out for the last several years. And it wasn't until my last book, You Are Free, Paula Ferris mentioned it on the Today Show, on Good Morning America. She gifted it to another anchor on air, 18 months ago. It was right before Christmas 2 years ago. So it like exploded. It actually sold more books that day than it did on launch day 10 months prior. And Gabe, my husband, it was the same day we had said yes to adopting Joy. It's a long story, but Gabe said, you need to write a 3rd book, like a practical step, like the end of your anxiety trilogy that really gives people handles and action steps on how to walk through sustained emotional, spiritual, relational health. And I was like, no, I'm writing a book on home. And he's like, no, but this is a felt need. Like, look at the response to this. And this was, him, my husband usually sees things farther out than I do. And so that's when we just really began the idea of writing it, because I had been living it, but I didn't think of it as a book. I didn't think like, this is how I've had to order my life so that I don't keep having panic attacks or anxiety attacks. And so this is how I've lived for the last 9 years, but I didn't know that it was a book. And so then when I finally mentioned it in May, so that would be, I guess, 5 months ago, I mentioned one time on Instagram and I did a post and I had 1,000 pre-orders from one Instagram post.
Wow.
And that's where I was like, okay, I guess this is the moment for this conversation. And that's just how it happened.
So it's
and
kind
then
of
all of a sudden, yeah,
go ahead.
It became a unicorn. Like, yeah, normally I wouldn't share numbers like this, but even just the launch team, they were such a huge part of it. There was over 1,700 on that and they had to pre-order the book to be a part of it. So
right.
I think that like the rules have changed. This is my third time around. Last time I learned a lot about book launching, and I really enjoy the marketing side of it because I've enjoyed doing free studies and things with people. And so as a result, you have an email list that you can talk to about these things and have, I don't know, it felt like we were a team. I had a great team. Zondervan was wonderful, great marketing team. And that all was a part of it. A lot of factors come in there.
Yeah, yeah. How did the Today Show thing happen? Did they hear about the book? Was it a connection? Was it from before?
So my PR, so we hired PR in June, and she pitched it, and they were saying no to everything. But again, they wanted to really talk about panic attacks and faith and anxiety, and so she called me in July. I had not even launched the pre-order page or talked about it beyond that one Instagram post in May. I had not even done anything, and she said, so which day on your tour could you be in New York for the Today Show? And I'm checking out bananas at the Kroger self-checkout. And I was like, wait, what? And she said, yeah, they want to do it. And I just was like, and I think it was, again, God's kindness to go, hey, you're going to work really hard and I'm going to appreciate that. But this part's done. You know what I mean? Like I had literally nothing to do with that. I don't know. And I honestly think I go back to the book now. I do. Thankfully, Shauna Niequist was a good friend of mine when my very first book came out. And she just said, you can have a splash in the beginning, like a lot of us, we work really hard to do, but ultimately the credibility of the content itself and how it relates to people is what is going to actually make a book sell, like over the life of the book. And I think this is my third one. I didn't get this reaction the first two. I certainly have had, the second one did wonderful, but I think the second one was really written to the church. It's about the freedom that we already have. And this one, I felt a strong conviction, even as I was finishing those final edits, that these are for people. This is for people outside that have curiosity about faith, that maybe haven't invited God into the middle of their pain because of whatever reason they've been wounded by the church or God doesn't really seem relevant to them. This is, to me, a bridge to people to consider that God actually has a created order and a plan and a purpose for them and wants to be invited into that. But because we have free will, we don't have to invite him into it. But if he's not going to force it, but I think sometimes our pain gets us to the point where we are willing to consider that again.
That's interesting, Rebekah, because I mean, we're both writers and this is your interview, not mine, but I was on a phone call with my publisher yesterday. So I have a book on stress and overwhelm and burnout that comes out in September of 2020. And I have the same conviction that this is definitely for people inside the church, but I really feel, and this, I'm the last guy to speak for God because I think that gets way overdone. But I would say I feel a prompting or a leading to like, no, this is for the lawyers you used to work with in Toronto, even more so than my last book. And people who don't have faith, people who maybe meditate or do yoga, but don't understand Christianity. How did you write this book differently with that in mind? Or did you write, because you do talk about your faith, like you talk about it in there, but what was different when you tried to get that voice in this book?
Well, I want to always relate to the reader no matter where they stand in faith. The feelings and the emotions and the response and the doubt and the fear and the questioning. I mean, I'm wrestling with God in the first 3 pages like, am I a fraud? I don't think most people outside of the church are used to hearing someone inside the church saying that out loud and being sincere and honest about that. Because then all of a sudden we become relatable again and approachable because we're not preaching as if we've arrived and as if we don't struggle and as if we've got this thing figured out. And I think the humility that we can take as people who follow Jesus all of a sudden becomes compelling again to someone outside the church. And the realness, the honest, you don't have to be a great writer, a brilliant like wordsmith to write a good book as long as you can connect. If you have to be honest though, and the only way you can connect is if you're honest. And I think sometimes we're trying to write these eloquent books, but we're not willing to be honest. And when we begin to get really honest, there's all of a sudden an open door. Whether I'm teaching from a stage or I'm writing a book, I'm like, no, this is where it took me. Someone outside of the church is going to go, wow, I didn't know that people even inside faith were that vulnerable with their relationship with God. That's where I'm at. And that's, if I could invite God into that and he would not reject me and send me away, then I'm interested in hearing more about him.
That's interesting. I've heard you say in other interviews that you've always been a pretty direct person, almost an oversharer. Am I misquoting you? To the point where I heard you say, Gabe, early in your marriage would be like, please don't say this at group or, totally. That kind of thing. Is that like where is the line for you between, because this is a pretty honest book. I did read it prepping for this interview. It's a great book. Where is the line for you between what to share and what not to share?
Well, when it's a story about me and there's redemption, there's a thread of it somewhere. It doesn't mean I have to have arrived or figured it out, but I see God's closeness in it, his nearness, the conviction, the maybe the outcome on some level, the other side of depression or the other side of fear. Then I think, yes, this is an inroad to share. I don't share stories that are about other people because it's not, while it very much affected me and I was a half of that story, out of honor, I'm not going to share that because it might jeopardize something else with someone else. And I just wouldn't do that. I don't think that's honoring. I think ultimately our role as followers of Christ is walking the way of Jesus, who lowered himself to the form of like being God, lowered himself and walked in humility and took death. And I think sometimes in the church, we want to raise ourselves and get all these accolades and we don't want to take death. And so to me, taking death is like being willing to share something that's vulnerable or intimate, knowing that, I might not look like I've have it all figured out, but actually that's the place where people find hope. They begin to actually find like, wow, you walked through some hard things and yet your faith is still strong. In fact, in ways it's stronger because you really are resting in the fact that God is at the helm of your life. And as a result, I love engaging. When we moved to New York City 9 years ago, yes, it was the birthplace of panic disorder for the first couple of years, but then walking out of that, I became so vibrant in my faith talking to non-believers because I was like, hey, here's the thing. You don't have to agree with this. You don't have to believe with this, but this is what God has shown me, that there is a freedom in being able to lay down our burdens, not feeling like we have to fix and save ourselves in every area of our lives. And for the person who's tired, I don't care where you are in faith, you're like, that sounds interesting. I'm curious. I'd like to hear more because you seem to have some joy that I could borrow from. And I think if we don't live as a witness, then it doesn't matter what we say. But if our lives start to reflect transformation and abundance and joy and honesty when we have relapse, that's the point of the book. I started in vulnerability. Yes, I had relapse. What do I do with relapse? What does anyone do with relapse? And I'm so grateful for that moment because it reminded me that you don't take credit for any of this. And there's an empathy for the person who has a victory season and then a struggle season. And when those trials come, how do we respond? And it gave me a tender heart for people. It gave me more dependency on God, which I think is the goal, so that our faith can grow. And it gave me more boldness. It gave me more boldness to go on the Today Show and say our identity is not formed by what our kids see online. It's the only one who can speak into our identity, no matter what label the world has given us, whether it's OCD, ADHD, I don't care. Like, the only identity, that's not who we are. That's what's come against us. The only identity that we have is formed by God. I wasn't planning to say that on public television, but I was so, in the end, glad I did, because I was like, this is actually the truth that I believe, and the truth sets you free. And if that's the case, then people who might be a little like confused by it are at least intrigued. I had a friend in New York, because I was in New York when this was happening. And so several of my besties from New York, we all had brunch the next morning. And one of the girls said, hey, we were all watching it at work, and my agnostic friend and my Muslim friend were all like in tears watching.
Wow.
Because there was something you were saying that was resonating deep, deep down. And I think it's important that, as no matter where we are in what denomination, but as people of faith, it's very important that we be like, you think of the prophets in the Old Testament. I believed and therefore I spoke. And I want to be that on the things that matter, on the things that I feel strongly about. I choose, as we've discussed, what not to speak about. But I think when it comes to proclaiming Christ, the freedom and the peace that he is for us, and how God invites us into a story of healing, then I'm gonna talk about that. And I think let God just do the work.
I don't want to get into gender stereotypes, but a little background from me. About a year ago, I decided, as a male, and we have tens of thousands of content creators here, preachers, writers, bloggers, podcasters, you name it, YouTubers. And as a guy, I'm like, I want to put myself under the leadership of some women writers that I don't know particularly well and I really admire. So I started reading and getting to know, Ann Voskamp, mutual friend, Lisa TerKeurst, Annie F. Downs. I was on her podcast. She was on mine. And one of the first things, you can be 10 minutes into this project and you realize, wow, women seem so much more vulnerable than men do. They do to me. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, that's something that I've seen, and it's a reminder to me, and particularly the bigger the platform becomes, and we're about to hit 10 million downloads on this podcast moments from now. Wow. The more you're tempted not to open up. At least I won't speak for you. I am tempted to pretend I have it all together when I don't. And it's way more of an active struggle than when there were 100,000 people or, 1,000 people or 50 people. Can you speak into that? Because I think that's a unique voice that women, in my opinion, seem to master better than men.
That's a great distinction. And I wonder how much of that is really just part of our hardwiring or our DNA, because obviously God is very intentional about male and female, and even just when he knits us in our mother's womb and all the things he puts there is a vulnerability that women carry that men don't carry. And I think that's partly why men and women are together. Now, granted, it doesn't mean that men aren't feeling that same vulnerability, but sometimes I know for Gabe, like, his vulnerability would be, I want to make sure that I provide and protect and defend my family. So his vulnerability might be more like, I want to make sure that I can do those things. And sometimes I don't feel equipped to do those things, but that is the responsibility and the burden that I carry. I think the female in our home, as a mother of 4, my vulnerability is more to read what's not being said, like read the room, discernment, like see behind the eyes, like dig in to those conversations, because there's a heart thing going on. So we've got like the outside thing going on, but then we've got these inside things going on, whether we have 3 teenagers. And so it's trying to get behind those conversations and say, what are we missing? Are there places that we're running too fast. I always have to lead with my own vulnerability in that, because once we do, and Gabe now we joke because we do a small group. And when we were first married, I would be, I've always been, like you said, the chronic oversharer. And so Gabe would be like, what stories are we willing to tell on our way to small group? And now we're in a group, and so all the guys were joking Gabe, they're like, it's where everyone goes around the room and shares where they're at. And then Gabe goes and everyone's like, can I do mine again? Because he really has become so much more vulnerable and honest. And what I find is that when male or female, when we are willing to be honest, almost everybody is like, exhale. Oh, so that's the kind of relationship this is going to be. So I'm safe to tell you this thing because you just told me this thing. We all really want that connection and intimacy and friendship, but you're not going to have that with a large group of people. And so I would say for men, the more you're vulnerable with a friend or two or three, then the more comfortable you're going to get with doing that in your work or your writing or your teaching, because you realize that there's a safety there. Because to me, part of verbal processing is getting things out that you're struggling with. And then as you get them out, you're like, okay, that's not as big of a thing as I say it, as it was in my head. And I also now realize that I'm not alone in it, and that I'm drawing strength from you as a result. So thank you for free therapy in friendship. So part of what vulnerability does is it keeps us healthy emotionally.
That's really helpful. And you're right, and I have that kind of relationship with a few friends where, there's nothing really off limits. And I think you're right. And I think one of the challenges, this is a frequent theme on this podcast, is for a lot of leaders, and I would suggest particularly male leaders, that friendship quotient is missing. There's just not as many as we need to have. Can you take us back to your first experience of anxiety? Because you describe yourself as a pretty driven person in your 20s and you had it all together, and then it kind of came to a crashing halt. Can you catch us up on that story?
Sure. Well, the first halt was at 26 when my firstborn son was born with Down syndrome. And we didn't know until 6 hours later after he was born. And it was an emergency C-section, like the doctor said, failure to thrive. You have no fluid. He stopped growing the last trimester. So he was only 4.5 pounds full term.
Wow.
And all this was a surprise at 39 weeks. So that whole day was so traumatic in so many ways. It's a longer story in the first book. But as a result, I got on my knees before God that next year. And my faith matured more in 1 year than it had in 20. And partly because I was grieved, I was crying out, I was fighting for his life to come home from the intensive care. And then once he came home, just trying to navigate my role as mother and what does healing and wholeness for him look like? Because it wasn't just Down syndrome, it was just growth and even just the delay that he was up against. And I was full-time at a church at the time, North Point, actually. Andy Sanders. Yeah. I was there was only 30 of us on staff. And it was early days. And my role was director of married adults to get 5,000 adults and 500 small groups. And I had a team, but I realized about a year in that I was, my team knew more what was going on than me. And I just felt God clearly say, this is a season where you need to come home. Because Cade was up to 8 hours of therapy a week. And so my life was just done as I knew it. And so that began, there wasn't anxiety there, but there was definitely pain. There was surrender. We have 2 more kids. My husband and I launched a nonprofit we co-founded called Q. And so 9 years later, because that organization is all about engaging faith on the front lines of culture, whether arts, media, government, policy, education, we moved to New York City because so many people we were working with were coming through that space. And we were convening these gatherings all around the country. So our second one was at Gotham Hall in New York City. And so I think we went with these dreams and ambitions and And my youngest daughter at that point was starting kindergarten. So I had ended that decade, of diapers and Cheerios and poop, and was trying to rediscover who was she before this. I forget. And so in that 4 months in moment, I'm taking the train down to Parsons School of Design. I'm back, in fashion and like design, because that was my background. And 4 months in, I had my first panic attack on a plane. And then that continued for over a year. Planes, trains, elevators, subways, crowds. And I got to where it was rooted in claustrophobia. It made no sense to me. It was totally foreign, but the anxiety was so intense physically that I started taking 9 flights of stairs or walking an extra mile or just avoiding and declining invitations because I couldn't get a handle on it. And that lasted for over a year.
Can you, and I've struggled a little bit with anxiety, and certainly I've burned out. I mean, I did a great job on that one, but I don't think I've ever had a panic attack. So for those of us, I know a lot of listeners have, but for the people who haven't had a panic attack, can you describe what that feels like?
Sure. So it's not rational. Your body is acting and responding as if you're being held at gunpoint. So the adrenaline of your heart is just beating out of your chest. You're sweating profusely. You can't even find your words. It's sheer terror. And for me, it was rooted in this idea of feeling trapped in a tight space. So the plane turbulence wasn't what was throwing me. It was that when this plane hits, I'm going to be stuck here and I'm not going to be able to get off. And then on an elevator, same thing. Like, what if this door doesn't open? I will, if I have to sit in this small space, I will die. And it literally, that's what you're feeling like. And so I've learned as I've studied claustrophobia in general, it's a metaphor for feeling trapped in a context in your past, whether it's a relationship or a circumstance or literal.
Yeah,
you might have been physically trapped, but the only way to combat that is through exposure and rewiring your brain to go like rationally. And that for me, I had to just very much so, because for me, the airplane was the trigger for me initially. But then in New York, it was everything that was small or crowded.
Which is everything in New York, right?
Yeah, everything in New York. But I do remember being in a moment where I just was physically, my body was doing the panic attack. And then mentally, I was coming back from a funeral of my aunt, and I pictured her like staring into the eyes of Jesus. And I just kept holding on to that vision in my eyes while my body's like acting insane. And it subsided, like it did the whole cycle of panic. And yet mentally, I had to focus on something, a fixed point that was beyond myself, that was full of peace. And it's just hard to explain, but I do think for a lot of people that have this, it's like your body, there's a book called Your Body Keeps a Score, and it's how you have trapped trauma that your body keeps reliving, but your cognitive brain cannot remember it. It doesn't actually have the ability to discern fully why this is happening. And so it's a fascinating read. He treated trauma patients from war or abused children for over 30 years, and it's very scientific, but it is true that we all store some level of trauma, which is basically trauma just means it's anything beyond the bounds of nurture. So it can be, it doesn't have to be an incident. It could just be the way you received or didn't receive like love or rejection, or it could be something that was either too much or not enough. And every kid growing up takes that in differently. It doesn't mean that your parents were bad or that someone abused you. It just means that sometimes for each of us, we walked a road that fell outside of the boundary of nurture, where we didn't feel like there was someone we could go to or someone we could talk to or someone who was our safety. And so as a result, we kind of are kids that grow up that are trying to hustle and strive and read the room and work the room and find that acceptance by whatever means necessary.
So what was your journey with panic attacks like? Because you mentioned you opened the book with relapse, right? So you got it under control to some extent. How did that happen? And then, just catch us up to where that is today.
Sure. So after that year, I do remember no longer confined to small spaces. I would wake out of dreams or in my bed, and I would wake in that same panic attack mode. And so September 20th of 2011. I wrote the date down because it changed everything. I woke in the middle of the night full of terror, can't find my voice. My husband wakes up, begins to pray like he knows the drill. And he begins to pray. And then all of a sudden I found my voice and I just held up my hand and I said, rescue me, deliver me. I cannot do this without you. And in that particular moment, I don't know why the Spirit of God prompted me to cry out in that way. But in that particular moment, I was flooded with peace. Like for the first time, just everything stopped immediately. And I just collapsed on the bed and lay there in the dark and nothing could move but my eyeballs. And I just remember thinking like, I don't even know what this is. You know, there might be a name for this in Pentecostal circles, but this Baptist girl has no idea what is happening. So, I mean, I was just like, I wouldn't have called it healing at the time. I don't know. I just walked out the next day and I started to see the city in living color. And I started to realize that when you're sick, you only look inward, but when healing begins, you look up and you look out and you see everyone else.
True. So true.
And I started to see people just like me, you know, walking the streets of the city, gripped in fear. And I started to study faces on the subway and, you know, try to figure out their stories and smile at them and, you know, strike up conversations, just be kind of different. Because when you're so afraid, you're not trying to be someone for someone else at all. And yet I started meeting with different women for coffee and hearing their stories and realized, wow, so many of us are walking through hard things. And I started to write. That's when I started writing. I wrote an article for Q called Why Are Women Fading? And it was this idea that we march off to college, ready to charge hell with a water pistol. And then 2 decades later, we've lost a sense of who we are. And so in that lostness or that purposelessness that somehow got buried between the weight of roles and responsibility, we start to spiral. And that really just struck a chord and got me writing. And so I didn't actually have another panic attack for 7 years. I definitely had triggers of anxiety. I mean, certainly I would but I better knew I started to create these, again, rhythms for health. And part of it was just, if I had to get on a plane, that's the great irony of God. I now had to start getting on a plane every Friday to talk about the rescue of God, the same place I got panic attacks. And so what I would do is I would just put worship in my ears and I would literally read the word and journal like the whole time, because it was the only time the way I could just stay in that framework. I wouldn't even quite prepare for that night. It was more like, you're just going to need to direct deposit what you want me to share tonight, because I'm just going to need to kind of feast on you being my peace. You are my peace. So I submit to that and I come under your covering of peace. I don't need you to give me enough peace to get through this flight. I'm just going to submit that you are my peace. And so taking that role of submission under that, I felt covered. I felt protected. And I just kind of had several go-to passages or scriptures I would read. And it did. I was flooded with peace. And that's why when Jesus says, the peace I give, the world cannot give, so don't be troubled or afraid, I think it's so true. We don't always experience it, so we doubt that that's true. But when we get to a point where we've tried all the things and they're not working, then we consider this again and go, okay, are you really the Prince of Peace? And can we submit and come under that? And can you be that for us? And that came through just a lot of time of just focusing in that way, a lot of prayer, and then just walking in a new way, just deciding if this is already done, I'm going to receive it. And then my life verse that kind of came to my head after all this season of coming out of that was Rebekah, I don't give you a spirit of fear. I give you power, love, and a sound mind. And if that is true in 2 Timothy, then if that is true, then there's got to be a framework with which that God ordered for us to walk this out. If we are to be people of power, love, and a sound mind, then certainly he's going to give us a rule book or a playlist, something that's going to actually help equip us to do that.
I think we've all been in a place where we think we've conquered something and then all of a sudden it's back. So that would be 2018. You had a relapse. What happened?
Yeah. So I'm stuck in this tiny little bathroom stall. It was back. I mean, I start the book with a story, but it really was that that we were in this 100-year-old home made out of concrete, basically on the cliffs of Carmel. And everyone had left to go into Carmel by the sea for a couple hours. We were hosting a retreat, Gabe and I, and everyone was taking a break. And I must have this thing with devices that power off too soon, because my iPhone died at like 40% because I did not want to pay and upgrade to a new phone. And so I had just texted him like, don't worry, I'll just take the car and I'll come meet you guys, because no one was going to come back for a couple hours. And then right as I'm doing that, my phone dies. The bathroom stall will not open. The door is like 100-year-old wooden heavy door with these antique locks, and that would not open. And it was literally 2x4. I mean, just enough for the toilet, cement walls, and no one's going to come back for hours, and no one would hear me, and I couldn't contact anyone. And something rose. It was as if the worst version of a panic attack I had ever had, because I was alone. And I was trapped in the tightest space I'd been in a long time, and had nowhere to turn. So as a result, my body freaked out so bad, like as if the muscle memory was yesterday from 8 years ago or 7 years ago. And when that happened, I was like, I literally am thinking, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be able to, you're not going to actually be able to handle this. Like, I was so afraid of me and spinning out, because here's what I know about a panic attack. When it begins, you have about a 15-second window to combat that immediately before it consumes you. And once it consumes you, you feel so powerless to it. Every single part of your body is jello, just trembling, shaking. And then you're mentally going, how do I even rein this thing back in? Like, it's one of the most paralyzing feelings, because you don't, because with fight or flight, the only thing you can do is run and escape. But if you can't, that's why solitary confinement is so condemning, right? Because it really, what it does is it robs the human of their dignity. Of, you are so stripped of help. So you've never have been more helpless in those than you are in those moments. That you are powerless. You are helpless. You are defensive. There's nothing you can do. And I think that's why it's so terrifying for people, because you can't take any agency over anything. Everything's been robbed from you.
So you obviously got out of that bathroom in that castle, right?
I just have to tell the story. Yeah, I looked up and there's this tiny, tiny little window, Palladian, tiny antique decorative window above the toilet, way high. It was the highest ceiling. And I thought, can I get up there? I mean, the fact that I saw the window, I was like, whoa. And then I thought, can I hoist myself to the back of this toilet? And will these hips lie? Can they get through this window? And I scratched my legs out pretty bad getting out, but I got out and it opened. And then I just sat there on the cliffs overlooking the sea. And I was just like, God, what was this? What was this? And that's where I just thought, am I a fraud? And then kind of the promise God gave me in that moment was, and I think it's a good reminder for all of us, because we can get pretty bold and bravado in our faith, but yet we're not the ones doing the rescue. And he just said, I sensed in my spirit later that night, I don't promise that fear won't come knocking, but I always promise a way of escape. And the passage of scripture that's from is that you will be able to bear it. So it's this idea that I'm going to be your ever-present help in any moment of trouble, no matter what your fear thing is. I am readily available right here, ready to be your source of strength and your aid. And I think what happens in church or outside the church, sometimes we get so self-reliant on putting all the systems around us. Mm-hmm. And yet we need the reminder that no, there are moments where that desperation, where we have nowhere else to turn, is when God is ready to move, because there is no other way. And I'm so thankful for that reminder, because I want to stay in tune with my frailty and with his sovereignty, and how the power of walking in faith really is from him. And it gives me the joy of him, gives me strength, that's a good thing to be reminded of. It keeps us humble.
So you do have rhythms that I want to get to in this conversation that have been really helpful. And I wouldn't say that I have that system, but I can resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And there are, I mean, for the leaders listening, I think everybody has got stress. Everyone's got some level of anxiety. People have been through depression. People have been through burnout. A number of leaders have panic attacks. And there's sort of the immediate delivery out of the moment, right? Like, okay, how did I get through this one? But you're saying there should be not a system, but there should be a rhythm to your life. There should be some things you can do that help prevent those conditions from arising. Is that accurate?
Yes, because when this relapse happened, I was not rested. I was not restored. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't really connected in friendships because I was traveling so much. There was a lot of output happening. There was not a lot of input. And so these rhythms are, again, a reminder that there's 4 rhythms and the first 2 are input. And it's funny, I have an online quiz like, what's your healthiest rhythm? And I've had thousands go through it. And of course, the lowest one for everybody is rest.
Which is number 1, right?
Right,
yeah.
right. I'm like, that's why we're going back to the drawing board. This is the foundation. It's the baseline for health. Is rest is a superpower. If you've forgotten to rest, or you don't have permission to rest, or you don't think that you can afford the time to rest, here's the thing: it's going to get you. Like, rest is not optional to God, and because He rested, and we must rest. I think part of it's just going back to the reason we're so stressed out and burned out is because we have forgotten how to rest. Our bodies are being pushed beyond the circadian rhythm that was established in creation, to be like machines that never turn off out of efficiency. So we have a phone telling us to never turn off. And meanwhile, you've got a sunrise with the blue light that tells you to wake up, that emits blue light, and the sunset that emits red light, which is natural melatonin for your body. So God's like, I've actually created a system that your bodies function and thrive within. But a machine, on the other hand, is going to tell you to do something different. And I do think,
and we're buying pills and devices off of Amazon that generate these things when it's right out there to begin with, out your front door.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you walk us through what rest looks like for you and kind of break that down? Because I'm glad you started there in the book. I mean, it was a lack of rest and about 1,000 other things that led to my burnout. And that is one thing that I take so seriously, and I don't always do well anymore. But it's more than just sleep. I mean, sleep is part of it, but what does rest mean?
Right. Sleep, there's 7 chapters I start with. So rest and restore are your input rhythms, and connect and create are your output rhythms. So we'll get to those in a minute, but rest and restore. So rest for me is the inner life, the health of the inner life. Like, am I okay? Is God and are God and I okay?
Yeah.
I've had a real conversation in the last few days. And so the first chapter is all about taking inventory of your life, because I think sometimes, because we're so busy reacting and going, we don't pause long enough to go, is the life I lead the life that longs to live in me? Am I actually doing the work that I am so passionate about? Or am I just reacting to everything? And so part of this is take a tech detox. I walked through having to do that for 3 months, and how that created in my heart a desire to sleep again, dream again, learn again. All of a sudden I'm thinking, wow, I have original thoughts again. This isn't me trying to look at what somebody else did on Instagram and go, how do I recreate that?
What did your tech detox look like? Because that's, I've read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport, and it's really interesting. What did yours look like, and what did it do?
For me, I looked at where I spent most of my time, and it was Instagram. And it had been 7 years, almost to the day that I began Instagram. I was an early adopter. We just moved to New York. It was an online, photo gallery for my friends back home. So I take dumb pictures of a hot dog cart or like tulips in Central Park, and, my kids like sitting on, a statue or whatever. But then I realized, as my platform grew with writing and teaching, I stopped making it about what I felt compelled to share, but more about what I thought people wanted to hear. And so I lost my voice in some way. I didn't lose it when I was writing or teaching, because when you're in the room, you can you still are who you are. I mean,
Yeah.
I found it so much easier with no filters to just be real. But somehow online in that medium, it felt a little more like it had to be editable, whether the photo was editable or the copy was editable. There was still like a degree of separation that was hard to overcome. And then you're always looking at what everybody else is doing. So finally, my dad died when my dad died, it was a long, painful journey. He had died in April. And I felt prompted to get off social media for Lent. And I was like, God, it's not that big of a deal. And so I ignored it. And then I found that after my dad died, I was really facing depression. And I was very familiar with that because I had depression in New York. And I called a friend and I said, I don't want to hemorrhage publicly. And so I'm just going to get offline for the whole summer. So I took 3 months off. And it was great. I didn't even have my phone. Like I got to where I didn't even know where it was because apparently I just was really just unplugging, trying to heal, trying to grieve. And I learned even in that chapter on tech detox that I finally am going around the bend and I see the sunset that's so glorious in Franklin. There's a lot of pretty sunsets in Franklin. And normally I would feel the compulsion to take a photo and share it. And so I reached for my phone and realized I don't even have it with me. I have no idea where it is because I haven't looked at it for a week. And because it's summer and my kids are home, we're all just as family being together. And God says, you're worthy to receive something beautiful and you don't have to share it. Wow. And it made me ask the deeper question, why do I always have to share publicly these gifts you give me that are really meant for us and meant in communion and meant for intimacy? Yes, we could certainly share things that you've done and that we're learning. And I'm not against that because I think we're called to that. But how do you differentiate when you're just receiving from God? And that this doesn't have to become a Bible study, right? Or this doesn't have to become an Instagram post. This is just receiving. So that was a fundamental lesson on worth for me. And honestly, when I re-entered in the fall, it was awkward. I was like, it's like going back to middle school and what's everybody wearing? What's everybody doing online? I didn't even know you could do this certain swipe up feature, whatever, So it took me a while and it still felt a little clunky. And even now I just have reordered how I see it. I think it's a megaphone for the work that you're already doing outside of that space. And that's a wonderful thing. But when it starts to become the work itself, to manage that, then to me, for my work, it's getting unhealthy.
How much of your anxiety do you think was tied to technology?
Well, because it's like a popularity contest that won't quit. It's like you're in 7th grade and you can never leave, everyone's just trying to be part of the cool guys. Because it's a public display of people sharing how much they like your content and how much they're commenting on your content. It's just literally created to be a place of comparison. It's set up that way. I mean, I know several countries were considering Instagram where they took down the visibility of likes and the visibility.
Yeah, we did that in Canada. Okay. I don't mind it now.
Well, that's why I love stories so much because nobody actually has to see me engage off in a direct message with someone. And I find that that's really freeing for me. I can minister. If someone has a question, I'm like, sure, and it's quick, but it doesn't have to all be public. And I think that anxiety is am I enough? Am I keeping up? And I think the reason why they consider taking that not public is because so many kids and teenagers, their whole their worthiness, their literal question of worthiness was contingent on a number. And then if that's the case, then we're no longer human. Yeah. We're just functioning as robots that say my worth is dependent on my output and my production cycle and my number. That is so far from where God sees humanity and his belovedness for us. I think, man, it's no wonder so many of us are spinning out because we really do see our worth based on our latest accomplishment.
You did a tech detox. Was it just social on your phone or were you just off the internet, period?
Yeah, I was off. I was off. I did listen to podcasts because I was I would go for long walks in nature, and I have several people who either whether it's sermons or just like practical content. I love learning. And to me, that was a great way to get outside. I got outside a ton. I think that's really important. There's a morning routine in there. I think it's very important for rest. So if you there's a chapter on routines for deep sleep. So hopefully you got a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
But then in the next morning, there's a chapter on morning routine. And because that first hour sets the framework for your day, what do you want that to look like? And so I talk people through about, making sure that I got outside and then making sure that I got low before the Lord. Like why a posture of kneeling for me is so centering is because that when you kneel, it automatically slows your breathing, which quiets your central nervous system. And it also, when you extend your palms, it's this, you put yourself before God in a posture of surrender and release. And then the heart and the readiness to receive. Because I do think prayer isn't about so much us just like giving God our laundry list of the things we want him to do. It's about communion with him and just almost praying in a way that just says, what do you have? Like, show me who you'd have me talk to today, or encourage, prompt me with like someone I can speak life to, and then convict me of the things that I'm blind to. That to me is what prayer is about. And then just show me where to go, what to do, what to say.
Do you have any Sabbath rhythms? I mean, I've talked to John Tyson about Sabbath and some other people about Sabbath. Do you take it? What does it look like for you?
Yes, that's the last chapter, and it Stop the Work. And we do Sabbath. It's a little bit harder in the fall, especially our kids are in school and they have so many things on a Saturday with school stuff, like fun things, because they're now in high school and they're finding this freedom with driving and friends and places to go. So then that falls to Sunday, which we try very hard, but still going to church. And then, it does still sometimes feel like work. So what we're trying to do is just making sure that on Sundays, though, outside of church, like no phones, we're just spending time together. We get outside, we go for walks, we play games, we just have long conversations. We'll play guitar. My kids play guitar and ukulele and love music, and just really try to make that rhythm of that Sunday be different than the rest of the weekend. And sometimes I will go online like Sunday night at later than 8 to just say hello if I do it. But I'm getting to where I'm not doing that actually much.
You just eventually lose interest, don't you?
You do. It almost feels like I don't want to really start my work week yet. I'm just going to wait till tomorrow.
So that's anything else on rest? Because I think I'm glad you started the book there. We have so many driven people listening to this podcast, and most of us stink at rest. We just do. We're just robots. We just go, 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 go. Anything else before we move on to restore?
Sure. Like the get quiet one is good because I realized like we don't know what we need to confess until we have room to listen and to get quiet. So sometimes we think like we're good. But the practice of getting quiet and in solitude, it's not loneliness. It's like it's you and God. You're not alone. There's a difference. But in those moments, so I try to carve out in my work week, not even on the weekend because we're all here, but even in a work week, I'll try to carve out an hour or two somewhere in a morning before I go into the office where I'm like, I need just some extended time of quiet, just no noise, no music, no nothing. And I'll read, I'll journal. Journaling is a huge piece for me because I process verbally. So that means I used to even process as I write to get to the bottom of some things that I'm confused about. Because I think we are invited by God to take inventory of our days and to just answer those questions I talk about in the first chapter. What's right, what's wrong, what's confused, and what's missing. Yeah. And we're not going to get to the bottom of those answers if we don't create space to get quiet.
Yeah, I'm finding solitude is such a gift these days. And I never used to love it. But do you have to have a certain level of peace with yourself to sit quietly? There's that Blaise Pascal quote that I love, one of my favorites. Man's chief problem is his inability to sit alone quietly in his room.
Yes, I find it such a comfort now, but as a kid, I would have never done that. You know what I mean? Now it's like, oh, finally. Like I joke with my mom friends, like, when all the kids get out of the car and they go in the house and you just linger in the car in the garage, and they're like, "Are you coming?" You're like, "No, I'm okay for a moment," because it's quiet. All of a sudden you really relish the quiet. I feel like I'm becoming my parents, because sometimes they'll play music so loud, even if it's worship or whatever. And I'm like, can we just turn it way down?
I know. I'm getting that way too. It's great. Okay. So restore. How is restore different from rest? Because I would think they're almost the same, but they're not.
Yeah. They are. They're both input, but the way I separate them out is rest is more for our spiritual health, where restore is for our physical health. So once you've kind of got this baseline with God, and you're getting the rest you need, and you're getting that input and that examining the heart, and those mornings are strong, then you're starting to have, let's work on the energy level, because you now have a plan of attack. And so for me, restore is all about what are we putting in our bodies? How are we stewarding the life we've been given, the bodies and the breath that we've been given? So it's all about diet, exercise, using the workout pants, not just wearing them for errands, and then what that does for our mental health, right? So we know that a brisk walk outside, or a brisk anything that raises your heart rate, produces serotonin in your body, which is what everyone's taking medication for, these SSRIs, is to give you this happy hormone. And yet when you actually work out, you are getting a happy hormone. You feel more confident, you feel more joyful, you feel more like, hey, life is not as overwhelming today. And my daughter, every time, she doesn't like to walk. She does other things that she loves to work out. But sometimes I'll be like, just go for a walk with me in the woods or whatever. We have a hiking trail. And in the end, she's like, "Oh yes, Mom, I'm in a better mood, but please don't remind me of that next time when I don't want to walk." Like, it's like, we know that it does. We take the dogs, and it's fun. But there's just something about getting outside. And then also I took our family through Whole30 a couple of years ago, because I felt an energy drain always having to be on planes. You do on.
Oh yeah.
You're traveling, and then you're speaking, and then you're traveling. And then, so basically you have a 36 hour window of just nonstop, with a little bit of sleep thrown in somewhere, a few hours for one night. But then you're coming home to a family that's looking at you like you're ready to go. And you're just like, I got nothing.
You want to lie on the couch. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm looking at this laundry pile, and I'm just staring at it with crazy eyes. I don't even know what to do. And so I would find the kids would go to school, come home at 3, and I would be like, I know I haven't seen you all day, but I need to take a nap. And I thought, no, this isn't who I want to be as a mother.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm feeling this adrenaline on the road, but the reason I'm able to do that is because of adrenaline. But then I get home, and that crashes, and I really, this is the quote behind me: if you want to bring happiness to the whole world, go home and love your family. And I'm like, it's hard to love them if you're sleeping the whole time. So part of it was, I've got to change my diet so that it doesn't spike with caffeine and sugar. And then by 3 p.m, I'm crashing. So diet and exercise are a big part of this section of restore, as well as play. Play is a big part, taking us back to childlike fun.
I want to go back to diet for a moment and not leave it, because, again, busy lifestyle. I did the Whole30 5 years ago. I lost 20 pounds, which I miss losing those pounds now. And I was on it for about 45 days. I could not believe the difference in energy. It was night and day, because I was getting into double napping. I've always been a nap fan, a sleep guy. But and then I'm like, I'm just not tired. I had way more energy. What did you discover on the Whole30, which basically eliminates dairy and caffeine and gluten and carbs, essentially?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, they call it tiger blood. Do you remember that?
I forgot. No.
Yeah. It's day 16. They're like, now it's tiger blood. You're invincible. Right. You never knew that you could have the potential for this much energy. But it's true. I think it's an anti-inflammatory diet ultimately. And what we don't realize, it doesn't mean that you have to be on that for life. It's really to kind of reset your gut, because your gut health is very much connected to your emotional health. And so as a result, if things are sluggish in your body, or you're eating foods that inflame and they can't actually stay on the move, then you get sluggish and you have brain fog and you always feel overwhelmed. And so part of it is then you kind of double the caffeine, and then you have a glass of wine to help you go to sleep or whatever that choice is. And so you're always trying to do something that gets you up and then slows you down versus a natural diet. I found that as I reordered my day with fitness and diet and had a more productive day, my sleep followed. My nights were more productive. I wasn't waking up intermittently as much because I was kind of doing our bodies they will respond if we treat them well. It takes some time, but it made a huge difference for me for energy level. It wasn't about weight for me. It was about energy. Because I think for you, for me, for so many of us, like we want to be able to run this race with perseverance for as long as we're given. And I would hate to just shortcut it just because I don't have the internal discipline to go like, I should probably not eat 3 donuts right now. You know,
Right.
I don't want to thwart that out of just that. So sure, there can be other vices, but like, let's just like try to eliminate the things that seem basic. And for me now, there's so many options. Even at Costco, we have 6, in our family. So I have to go buy lots of food. And even Costco has a million organic, healthy snacks now that are natural. There's a bar right now called That's It. And I gave one to my daughter today for lunch. And it's like, what's in the bar? It says a mango and an apple. And it basically is a fruit bar. There's nothing added. So there are ways to do it. You just got to find
So it's more
things.
Whole Foods. Are you still on, like, how long did you do Whole30 for? And
yeah, I stuck with it like as a lifestyle and never added cream or sugar back to my coffee. And now I don't do much gluten or dairy ever unless it's a special occasion. So I've pretty much stuck with it. But I'll do like Ezekiel bread as a gluten because it's those early grains, and I don't have any intolerance to that. But other than that, I'm just not doing what I used to do with baked goods and stuff like that.
I changed my diet, but it flipped back too far. So I'm in the process of redoing it now and just cutting some things out. But it's funny, the food chain's broken, that's for sure. And it is a direct cause and effect. Okay, let's talk about the last 2 rhythms. Man, this has been a great, helpful conversation. So do you want to talk, because we do have mostly creators listening, and we're not going to fail on these, but you've probably got a variation. So rest and restore. Pay attention to your body, exercise, sleep, and I think most people before we leave restore, what's your target sleep? Because you're a mom right in the middle of it, right? You've got 4 kids ranging in age from how old
7
to how old?
Yeah, so I have 18, 16, and 14, and then we just adopted a little girl from China. So she's in kindergarten. So we have a 6-year-old.
You got it all going on.
Yeah, we've got prom going on, and then we've got still pull-ups at night because she was literally in an orphanage till 9 months ago, and
wow.
She's doing amazing. But yeah, it's taken us back to those toddler days a little bit. It's been really fun. So your
target for sleep, how many hours do you shoot for a night?
I shoot for 7 and a half. I can do 8. Like last night I went to bed. I'm usually pretty tapped out and tired by 9:30, and then I'll probably fall asleep by 10. And we get up early, 5:30. Something like that. Gabe and I try to go for a walk. Now that it's staying dark a little later, once the time changes, we'll be okay. But we usually walk at 6:15 for about an hour because we've already put 1 kid on the bus. The other 2 are getting themselves ready. And then as soon as we get back, I get Joy ready. So we have to have, again, a morning routine is so essential. I think those first hours of the day really do establish the framework for the next 15 hours of the day. So be really cool about that.
And that's a good segue because you make the argument, and I think that's true. I've got some research in my own book about the connection between walking and thinking. So if you're going to create, do you want to talk about that? There is an actual correlation between physical movement and your ability to create great ideas.
I got a treadmill desk.
Oh, you did. And Voskamp has one too. That's funny.
We joke about it. But I have a chapter in Restore called Take a Walk. I did put it in that one instead of Create. But the point of it was that walking actually, it stops writer's block. So when I am creating, I just had a podcast. We have a podcast, Rhythms for Life, and I interviewed a friend. Ryan O'Neill was sleeping at last. And I said, how do you temper a creative block? Because he challenged himself to write like 36 songs in 1 year, score them, produce them, put them out. And he said, well, it would always be like, I would just take a nap and then I would take a walk, like a 30-minute walk or a 20-minute nap, to just stop. Because what happens is our subconscious needs to speak into that creativity, but we're always in the brain that's trying to produce. And so when you get away from it, all of a sudden the subconscious takes over again and starts to connect the dots that you weren't able to do when you were trying so hard. And you're like, oh, aha, that was the moment. And there's a book on rest I read a year ago, and it's not a faith book, it's a science book, but it just studied artists and scientists and past presidents for centuries that had to work within rhythm. And they would always do their most creative moments first thing in the morning. And then they would have lunch, then they would go for a walk, then they would take a nap. So I was like, they got a lot done. And they would do 70 volumes of work, or, all paintings, just all these writers, prolific, just brilliant people. And rest was such a centering thing for them with walking and napping.
Isn't that interesting? That there is, you can debate this all day long, and the night owls will email me, but I'm a morning person, very similar. I fade after 9:00 at night. I'm up usually pretty early, usually by 5:15 at the latest. And I will follow that rhythm. I will do all my creative output in the morning, kind of have lunch, go for a bike ride in my case if it's a nice day. And then I'm tired and I want to have a nap. And then if I'm lucky to squeeze 2 more hours out of the afternoon, that's a good day. So you're saying that's not an atypical rhythm.
No, in fact, in this book, they would say that back in the day, centuries ago, they would do correspondence in the afternoon.
Correspondence.
From 3 to 5, which I'm sure was hand letter writing, but for us is email. So, but the point is like sometimes, there has to be maintenance to our work, but maintenance work is probably not the best first thing in the morning. To me, that's more when you're, later in the day. The creative part of our work to me is earlier in the morning. That's what I've found in all my studies, and that's what usually works for me.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the last 2 rhythms, because I think that's so important: connect and create.
The reason why I start with connect is because you can't most people create in collaboration. So the whole point of these rhythms is that they're building blocks. You're rested, you're strong, you have community. And then with that community, you create amazing things. Collaborative work is very important. People think writing is a solitary sport. I have to say, I worked with 20 people to get this book out into the world. It's not a solitary sport.
How so? Like 20 people? Like what? I mean, you're talking beyond editors, right?
No, I'm talking, first my editorial team was, there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, including me. So 5 people actually. Then you've got someone else actually doing the copy editing. And then you've got someone who's helping with marketing, and then PR and agents. And then, so in the end, it's 20 people that I'm exchanging meetings, and it's just so fun because everyone's really great in their lane, and they're all collaborating on this book baby. And so I think that's the point of community, is that you find the people you love to do the work you love together. And there's so much joy there. So jumping into connect real quick, I write about friendship and about how to be the friend you wish to have, because there's a loneliness epidemic right now in society. 46% say they experience high feelings of loneliness, and 27% believe they don't have a real friend, like one real deep friend. This is up to ages of 38 in millennials. So that's a problem, because we're online talking to everyone, but connecting with no one. Because connection really can't happen outside of embrace, eye contact, nonverbal communication. And so this is taking you back to, what does friendship look like? What does proximity and permanence and presence look like in your home, in your city, in your neighborhood and community? And so I talk about friendship, leading with vulnerability, open porch policy we do at our home, where potluck over perfect. So I'll always host like a holiday, and we'll provide like the entree, like the meat or something. But I have friends that are way better cooks than me, and everyone loves to pitch in. And so I think hospitality is how the church began, breaking bread in homes, opening your homes. It does not have to be perfect. People just want to feel invited. And so I think part of this idea of around connect is to make sure we're carving space for that. Our marriage, make sure that we're carving space. Gabe and I will be 22 years this December.
Congrats.
And being real. And we're leaving in 2 days to help lead a marriage retreat for 80 people. And I think because of how much we value, we're dependent on a healthy marriage to do the work that we've called to do. So we don't want to take that lightly. And then I think the other thing that I find people struggle with in the connect rhythm in relational health, again, rest is spiritual health, restore is physical health, connect is relational health, that a lot of people hold grudges. And so we go to bed angry and we have unforgiveness in our hearts, which then grows into bitterness, which then grows to contempt. And I just remember a year ago waking out of another dream, and I just heard God say, again, not audibly, but just, you don't have a right to withhold forgiveness from this person. Wow. It was this idea that this is now becoming a weight, and it's affecting you physically in a way that's going to inhibit or prohibit even some assignments I've given you. And so I felt the weight of my sin right in that moment. I had to just confess, 3 pages in my journal in the middle of the night. And then I was like, well, crap, now I have to call this person. I was like, I'm fine confessing to God, but now I actually have to talk to the person, because James 5 says, confess your sin to one another, God and one another, so that you can be healed. And I think there's something to that. Sometimes we withhold forgiveness or we hold on to something for a long period of time. And we're so afraid to just go to that person, but be like, I'm sorry for the way my pain spilled onto you and how I took it on you, and I needed someone to blame. But I do believe that when we can start to forgive one another, to just choose to trust, to not condemn one another. And this goes for being online, doing that as well.
Yeah.
He who is without sin cast the first stone. To me, that's a strong one for me. Is I want to be relationally strong, and I can't control what somebody else is doing, but I can certainly control and ask for forgiveness for the places in my heart I have withheld forgiveness, or I've built a root of bitterness and allowed it to grow, because I don't want that to slow me down. I don't want that to be the reason, just like eating 3 donuts in the restore rhythm. Yeah. I don't want my grudge holding to keep me from walking in the fullness of what God's invited me into. So that's connect.
Wow. Okay. For all the creatives, all the outputters, and you guys, you have to get the book, but what's the quick skinny on create?
Well, so calling for me, the way I define it, is where your talents and your burdens collide. And so we get these birthright gifts in the womb. Psalm 139, God, all our days are written and planned before one of them begins. And then he knits us, and his works were wonderful. And then he invites us into this destiny that is really informed by burden, I believe. So I think the world understands that birthright gifts, those natural things that we're gifted at, but they don't always know why. And the burden is informed by the life you've lived, the journey, the family you've been born into. It's actually the places of pain. It's things that have broken your heart. It's the things that make you weep. And so for me, I was called Becca Book in 4th grade because I read 62 Nancy Drew books that year. We didn't have a TV, and I was obsessed with reading. I didn't know then that readers make writers. In fact, I never heard until I was 32. My mom was pushing my son on a swing, and she said, I always thought you'd write. And I thought that'd be super helpful when I was picking a major in college, because I just didn't ever connect the dots that I could write. I was a voracious reader, and I loved vocabulary, but I just didn't connect the dots that I would actually publish a work that was like way beyond. I was a musician. I played trumpet and piano, and that was kind of the lane I thought I was going to land in. But then I watched my dad have his first mental breakdown when I was a senior in high school, and he went into a psychiatric hospital when I was a freshman in college. And I watched him struggle much of his adult life in the area of like just a mild depression. And then I have a firstborn son at 26 whose IQ to this day is in the 40s. And so I'm a daughter and a mother sandwiched between 2 men in my family line that have struggled with mental illness on some level. And I just felt deeply when I started my struggle in New York, I thought, well, this is genetic, and this seems like that would make sense where I'm walking into that lane too. But that's why I think pain, even in that season, became purpose for me, because I was able to start writing about it or talking about it, bringing light to it, feeling passion about it, because the root of passion means to suffer. So I think sometimes even the work we're so passionate about comes from a root of suffering, of watching someone we love suffer, of us personally suffering in a way to where we're actually able to mobilize that into something beautiful that we are able to offer the world. And I do believe that the measure of trial you've endured does directly relate to the measure of hope you can offer the world.
Wow.
It's just watching, letting you be a vessel for that to flow through and being honest about it, because you then realize, oh, wow, so many other people are facing this too. I'm just trying to give language to it. And that's been the most rewarding part of my work, quite frankly.
I'm glad you make the connection between sort of the burden you bear and the story you have and the message you have. Because we get, I'm sure you get this, but a lot of young leaders who are like, what am I going to write? How am I going to build my platform? And I'm like, well, you kind of need a story first. Like maybe get a couple laps under your belt. And, now we have this influencer thing where you're just an influencer because people follow you. But at the end of the day, if you're going to have sustaining content, you kind of need a message. You need a story that somehow informs what you're sharing. Any thoughts on that?
I agree. I think, you can't write unless you've lived. And and if you've lived, that means there's some stuff you've learned. And it's important to not get ahead of ourselves, because God invites us into so much to share, but part of it, we really can't with authority take something public until we've wrestled it private, until we've walked it out, till we've watched him move, till we've seen a richness come. And then we can offer that as something redemptive. I think that's important, because we can put a lot of stuff out online today that we're feeling today. But is it something that's going to actually offer someone hope, encouragement, strength? It's hard to offer what you haven't received. So part of it is we have to walk that on our own with our community and our people, and then let it kind of surface, let it bubble to the surface. And you're right, that's how my first book came. It was a story of rescue. And I was like, all right, here we go. But the other part of create, I think not everyone are writers, and there's so many ways to create. And so I do a chapter here called Work with Your Hands. And I think part of it is we've lost the art of just the tactile things. And so I challenge people, just figure out what you can create with your hands.
You mean like build a birdhouse, right?
Yeah,
or something like that.
Or make a new recipe, right? Paint with your color with your kids. I don't care. Just something that just works a different muscle that you don't always professionally do. Go back to your 8-year-old self. What did you love when you were a kid before you learned how to be afraid and drove your parents? You loved it so much you drove your parents crazy. Like recover those things, those hobbies, those places of enjoyment, because that's this holistic picture of health, this comprehensive picture of who you said you love biking. You probably loved that as a kid, right?
I did. I was always on my bike, and I love barbecue. That's another thing. After I burned out, I'm like, okay, I need some hobbies, and to be able to make a brisket that's smoked for 23 hours, and to see your friends take that first bite, that's fun.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that to me is the comprehensive picture of health. It's not like, hey, we're killing it in our, vocational work from 9 to 5. We're actually relationally strong. We're inviting people in, we're sharing our hearts, and then we're making food for nourishment for them. And, that's what God sees when he creates us. He's like, I want this holistic picture of health. You're going to have a dominant rhythm that maybe is more effortless and more prone to, but don't neglect the other 3, because a holistic healing is going to include all 4 areas. You can't have the fullness, I don't believe, if you avoid one of those things, because God's not casual about any of them. He says, I made you to rest because I rested. I want you to steward your body. I want you to be one. I want you to be one, and I want you to walk in unity. And then I want you to take the birthright gifts I've given you in the womb and use them for my good and my glory.
Wow. Well, the book is called Rhythms of Renewal, and you can get it anywhere books are sold. But where can people connect with you online? I know you're on Instagram. Is it just Rebekah Lyons?
Yes. And my name is spelled a little different. It's Hebrew. The Hebrew spelling is RebekahLyons.
And do you have a website people can find?
It's just RebekahLyons.com. It's so basic. Just my name on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and then my website's RebekahLyons.com. And the book is Rhythms of Renewal. And it is on Instagram. Everywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it.
Well, I got to tell you, this has been a joy. Thank you so much, Rebekah. I really appreciate what you're doing and the message you're getting out there and the practicality of what you shared today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.